Hello there again. My name is Dan Brook, a retired cleric and academic from Hudson. We're pleased today to offer another in our series called Conversations with Clergy. You may remember from watching us other times that we came to the conclusion some time ago that within the context of public discourse, you can always find out plenty of people who are talking about the other social institutions that virtually all cultures have. And the one that often is sort of neglected in terms of its influence are the religious institutions. And the leaders of the religious institutions typically are quiet and going about doing their business and not all that involved in the public eye. And those that are sometimes don't reflect the essence of the various faiths. And so we're just really pleased and honored to be able to have some conversation with clergy from the region. And today especially excited and honored to have the Reverend Dr. Don Johnson, a Native American, member of the Makah tribe of Washington State. And we'll be pleased to learn about him, his background, his interests, and his current ministry, and indeed a book he recently published. So with that, we offer this to you and are grateful for your presence with us. Now then, the Reverend Dr. Don Johnson, it's great to have you on board. I wonder if you could just tell us, first of all, just because of where we sit today, how did you ever end up in Hudson, Wisconsin?
Well, that's a good question. I love the place. I've been living here now for about a year and a half. Prior to this, I lived for 20 years in Maplewood, Minnesota, so that's not terribly far from here. And from time to time, we drive over here, and as we did, we got to like the town, and we were at a point in our life we were thinking of maybe a move, and lo and behold, a home became available to us here that we really liked, and we already knew the town was a great place to be, so we ended up moving here, and so for the last year and a half, I've been a cheesehead.
Okay. Well, you know there are some non-cheeseheads that live here too.
Oh, I've seen them.
I mean, you can be a Viking too.
I've seen those Viking, and I actually happen to be a Seahawk fan, but
that's another story.
That's
right?
another story, yeah.
So tell us a little bit about your journey from being a Native American, the tribe that you are still a member of, your upbringing, sort of how you eventually connected with a church. Now that probably covers 30 years or more, but if you can just sort of give us a little bit of your background.
Well, I was raised on a reservation, Makah Indian Reservation, which is at the farthest northwest point of the United States, and grew up in a family that had experienced some trauma as a result of my dad's alcoholism that led to conflict with my mom and eventually increasing tension and a very difficult divorce process. But in that in-between time, I was the youngest child, and I grew up in a lot of that tension. And I was quite dysfunctional growing up. I mean, I was impacted by the emotions of that situation and took a long time to learn to walk and even talk. So then eventually my mother divorced, remarried, and life sort of stabilized. But growing up on a reservation, it can often be a challenging place. Poverty was part of our experience, although at the time I didn't think of it as poverty. We had been part of a marginalized group of people that came under the authority of the government, so they determined much of our lives, and so that built a dependence. So in that sense, it was a difficult, challenging place for me to grow up, and about age 14 we left the reservation. My stepfather got a job in Tacoma, Washington, and worked for McChord Air Force Base for a time, so we were thrust into a very different culture. The combination of that really disturbed me. I was struggling with being in a big city, coming from a small town, living with people who were different culture than I grew up with, feeling very alone, and it was during that time that I had opportunity to go to the Seattle World's Fair. And on the one day that I was there, July 8, 1962, in the shadow of the Space Needle, Billy Graham was there for one day, and he preached on the necessity of experiencing a relationship with Jesus, and that changed my life. And it wasn't long after that that I felt the call to go into the ministry. I was 16 years old.
And so when you felt this call, and at 16, what did you do between 16 and when you were ready for college then? How did you hang on to that spirit during what must have been some fairly traumatic years?
Oh, well, they were for a lot of reasons. One, I was now going into high school. I was in high school, and I loved sports at the time, and now I was feeling a different kind of call, and it was a little bit of a difficult separation for me. I was focused now on God. I really felt His presence, and I felt His peace, and part of my concern was, as I was growing up at that time, was just looking at the world situation. It was a difficult time for America. I mean, we went through the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, and few people know how close we came to blowing up everything. So that was the environment I grew up in. But at the same time, I finished my high school, and with the determination to go into the ministry, I ended up. This was the years of the draft, and I got my notice real quickly, but as soon as I had declared that my intent was to go into the ministry, then I was exempted from that, not because I didn't believe in the ministry or the military or the war they were fighting at the time, but simply because I felt this calling from God. Mm-hmm. I ended up going to college at Bethany Lutheran College in Mankato, Minnesota for a couple of years, and that was my first exposure to the Midwest. Mm-hmm. And when I graduated from there, I ended up going to a Free Methodist university in Seattle called Seattle Pacific, and graduated with a 4-year degree. And then from there, I re-engaged with the Lutheran world and ended up in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod Seminary in Springfield, Illinois. And that was in 1972, in 69, 72 era.
So how long have you been in the ministry?
Well, I just found out I've been in it for 40 years. Where did the time go by?
That's for sure.
40 years, and it's been so much fun.
So did any seminary at that time, Lutheran or otherwise, have much interest in or program for Native Americans, or any sensitivity really to the special needs of Native Americans?
I did not experience a lot of other seminaries programs or denominational programs in their involvement. I know that there are some denominations that had a historical connection with Native Americans, probably the Episcopal Church, the Presbyterian Church, the Catholic Church. Different ones had, but I was not familiar with them. Mm-hmm. The Lutheran Church seemed to have the least amount, mm-hmm. and that was very unusual. And why would I end up in a Lutheran church if that was the case? Well, I really didn't research all of that, but I did find with Lutherans in general a real interest in Native America, and that was really helpful in encouraging me. So eventually I went through their seminary program, graduated in 1973, got a call through the Northwest District in the old ALC Pacific District to actually start a mission church in my home community. That was very unusual, to go to your own hometown.
And they did that maybe because they had no other options at the time, you think?
It was during that time, as you recall, it was the civil rights movement, and there was a lot of attention to ethnic groups, and Native Americans kind of followed on the coattails of the black movement for civil rights. And there was a lot of interest in the church at that time to deal with some of these social issues. And so I think at that time there was a favorable response from a lot of different denominations, but as the Missouri Synod and the Lutheran Church as a whole, I think all said, how can we more effectively reach out? So they wanted me to do something. They didn't have a pathway themselves except through me, so they asked me to start a mission church in my town. Was called Neah Bay, which is right on the tip of the Olympic Peninsula of the Washington State. It's the end of the road or the beginning.
At the beginning. And were there any other denominational churches in the town at that time?
There were. I had some nominal experience as a child growing up there in the Presbyterian Church, but it was falling on hard times. There was an Assembly of God, a Native American Assembly of God type of church. There was a couple of mom and pop type churches. And there was always a parade of people coming in to do weekend evangelism and conversion experiences, setting up tents or meeting in some special place. So we were not without some kind of outreach to our ministry, to our people.
So maybe I'm paraphrasing it, but the Bible has a little note in there that a prophet has no honor in his or her own hometown. So how did it work to be sent back to your hometown where everybody knew you as a kid and all the mischief you probably went through like most kids? And
well, I wasn't an especially good kid.
You
no, you hit it right. Some of the mischief I'd done. I think there was, on the part of the elders of my community, a real acceptance of me. In fact, I went to them before I even came back and asked them permission to come back. I went to my tribal leaders and asked them. I think they were a little surprised that I would do it because they just assumed I would on my own anyway. Mm-hmm. But going back, I realized that when you're familiar to the people that you grew up with, they know your family, you know their history, they know your history. It does create a barrier in outreach. I think Jesus certainly experienced that with the people in Nazareth, with their familiarity with him. Who is he to be telling us these things? Or what does he know about us that he shouldn't? And it complicates the ministry. But overall, I began to find out that people were really looking for me to bring my educational past and my disciplines and the things that I'd learned in the outer world mm-hmm. back to my community to make a difference. So I ended up teaching a little bit in the high school. Mm-hmm. I ended up being on the school board eventually. I ended up being elected to the tribal council and leading economic development. Mm-hmm. And one of the most important things I learned during that time working with my people is that we had been so dependent for so long on the government that we'd lost our own initiative. And so I found during the times that I was able to change that model and began to encourage our own people to take responsible roles in the government, and we would pay them as we paid other people, that they would rise to the level of their capabilities and they could do a lot for our community. So I realized that needs to happen in the church as well. So often I think the church has been a little bit like the government in doing things for and not raising people to a level of self-determination so they can shape their own futures. And I think that's what God wants people to be. He wants them to be able to do that, use the gifts he's given them to make a difference. And that's one of the things that I brought out of that tribal experience, working as a tribal leader, back to the church when I re-engaged with my ministry to a broader community.
And how did that change in attitude change the tribe itself over time?
Well, it certainly created a better environment for the economy. More people were put to work. They felt better about themselves, and they were enabled to do many more things in the community with themselves and their families because now they had economy. Before they were much poorer. Mm-hmm. So now with the infusion of more money into the community, it did help. There's no question about it. But also the sense that I could remember times when we did some very significant projects like harbor development to protect our fishing fleet. And I remember the idea that grew out of that and how people joined together when they saw it could actually happen. We can be part of a solution to a big problem that our community needs. And it raised the level of everybody's sense of worth because they were working together toward a positive project. I've discovered that same principle works in empowering and enabling people that we recruit into the ministry, Native people who we recruit. We share the vision that you can do this. You can make a difference in your own communities, and we'll give you the training, and we could give you the opportunity. And they rise to a really high level, and you don't have to tell them what to do. They'll do it on their own before you do it, and they'll work harder than you thought they would work, and they'll be happier because they made a difference and they were part of a solution. And that's what has shaped our ministry, and it's just been amazing. We probably have more people standing at the door of our ministry organization, and it's a very small one, asking how they can be part of us and can you help us do that. We obviously are struggling to keep the funds coming in to make this all happen, but at the same time we've been blessed by our supporters.
For those of you who are watching and have an interest in Native Americans, if you go online, I'm quite confident the website is makah.org, which is the official website of the Native American tribe of which Pastor Johnson is a member. And you'll find a lot of interesting history on there and details and beautiful pictures. And it's a Native American group that, those of us in the Midwest who are used to Chippewa and Ojibwe and others just don't have a connection with. So I'd encourage you to look it up and read a little bit about their history and where they are currently. Anyway, so you were there for approximately 20 years as a pastor, a community leader, all sorts of things. So how did you end up in Maplewood, Minnesota? Well,
in all those years that I was there was I think it was a God-driven thing of wanting to further my education. Mm-hmm. In my family, I was the only one that graduated out of college. In some cases, the only one that got out of high school. So we didn't have a lot of educational background in our history. But I felt like I really wanted to get a doctorate. And I happened to have a friend of mine who happened to be from the St. Paul area visit me one summer, and we cooked a salmon on the beach together, and he said, you know, you ought to come to Minnesota. And they have a number of colleges and universities there, and there's Luther seminaries in St. Paul. They offer a degree that you could probably get a doctorate in. And then about the same time, I was courted by another Christian organization to come and work for them, and they would allow me to live in Minnesota so I could pursue both a job and my educational degree at the same time. So I took that long trip across country, left the ocean behind, left my commercial fishing background experience back, all the things that I did, and really left for a foreign land. It was sort of like Abraham, you know, leaving the Ur of the Chaldees. You know, you feel that tug of your people, your tribe, your tradition, your history, and you come to a highly urban part of the world where the ocean does not beat against the shoreline near you. And while they had lots of lakes, they were not the ocean. But I ended up being comfortable in Midwest. I found a great place to not only achieve my level of education I sought, but just getting to know the Midwest culture and the people, and it gave me a whole new perspective.
And can you tell us a little bit about that work?
Yes, our ministry, as I shared already, is focused on recruiting and training Native people and giving them the opportunities that God had given me and God had called me to. And we soon began to develop a ministry across much of the West. We work in Alaska with an outreach ministry out of Fairbanks, Alaska, where we place as many as many volunteers as many as 30 communities, Athabascan Native communities, for week-long events, teaching Vacation Bible School, servant projects, and the like. We have several ministries in the Olympic Peninsula of Washington State. We do similar kinds of things. One's a congregational ministry. One's kind of a help and Bible study ministry to a community where there's poverty, and we built something called Hope House, which helps distribute food and clothing to those most needy, but we also do Bible study there. The congregation in Neah Bay that I started is an active congregation and continues to work, and that's part of our ministry. We have ministry in Montana. We have associate pastors that we work with the various districts, and we support them and we help train some of their people. Ministry in northern Minnesota with the near Bemidji, where we work with Native Americans who have been incarcerated. And so that's a really challenging ministry because you're working with some of the people who have been repeaters in jail for various reasons. And we found real success with that. We have a little ministry in Canada where we have a couple that we are supportive of who are working with people who have been sexually abused. We also have something like that in Alaska as well, but in our Alaska ministry. But so many of the young people in these communities that are isolated and poverty-stricken, where there's a lot of alcoholism, the children are really abused a lot. And there's suicide and there's murder. There's a lot of things that go on. So we're working with some of the most needy groups. We have a campus ministry in Lawrence, Kansas, at the largest Indian university, federally funded university in the United States, called Haskell Indian Nations University. And we have a couple of people there who are really gifted in working with young people. And we're building a $1.5 million leadership training center right adjacent to campus. The good thing is that the campus leadership there, the people who run the school, are very supportive of what we do because we're supporting their students. So that's all part of what we do. But we have other scattered ministry sites. Navajo, New Mexico, we work with the Navajo people, and we've got a congregation that was almost dead and gone, and we took it over, and it's starting to show life. So that whole focus of our ministry is raising up leaders, telling them God has a special use for them, that He's equipped them, and that they are the ones that can do it, and then affording them the opportunity to receive the training they need so that they can serve their own people.
This is an aside. It's a question based on my own personal ignorance. You mentioned Alaska. The Native American people that we call Eskimos, how are they related, if in any way, to the North American, Native American population? Same peoples, basically?
No, they're not. Probably maybe on the bigger scale of where did the origins of different people, are we Asian people who came across that? But specifically, they're a different group. They're related to the similar group of people over in Russia, on the coast of Russia. They're similar peoples, and there are Inupiaq and the Yupik. They're two different kinds of Eskimo. One is a forest. The Yupik are people who live more into the forest. The Inupiaq are the coastal Eskimos. And their culture is similar to Native Americans, but physically they look different. Very. We used to have a ministry and continue to support a ministry with the Inupiaq and the near Nome, Alaska, and the Seward Peninsula. So we've done a lot of work in the past with them, especially when we were using our airplane ministry.
Now, I read a little bit about a new ministry you guys have where you're trying to develop a that kind of a indigenous ministry among Native Hawaiians.
Well, yes.
Are Native Hawaiians related to Native Americans?
No, they're not, but their experience is similar. They're a Polynesian people and very wonderful in terms of their ability to cross large bodies of water. It's said that they actually traded with my people many, many years ago. We have a ministry that we began there about 2 years ago. We called a man who saw our vision for ministry. And he had some Lutheran background, and he said, why not me? And so we contacted him and got to know him a little bit and found out that much of what he describes about the Native Hawaiian experience, as you know, they were kind of taken over. Their land was their land, and powerful forces came and said, this is not your land, this is our land. And so they displaced them a little bit, and they made them subject and even put them under the Bureau of Indian Affairs. So, you know, they weren't, which they didn't like that at all because they're not Indian. But their experience is sort of like ours, so we share some common background. So they're looking also to shape their own future in ministry with the Lutheran world. So we have done our best to help get that going. It's possible that that message we have is applicable to many ethnic groups, not just our own. So that was one of the first evidences that we could cross the cultures.
I think it's almost a part of the human condition. Just a little aside, when my wife and I at one time taught and lived in Hungary. It was after the wall came down, and so we went there, even though we were properly trained, still thinking that we had a lot to teach the people in Hungary. And within the first week, some student said to me, you know, you've only been in education a couple hundred years in the USA. We've been in it 1,000 years. What do you have to teach us? And I thought, well, the attitude that you're conveying, you know, all of us to one degree or another who innocently think we know better than everybody else are all challenged by some self-reflection on the part we've played in making this mess for so many people on this small planet. I was going to ask another thing about, first of all, your family. When did you get married in this whole thing? And have your spouse and kids enjoyed your journey through all these activities and accomplishments? And
well, first of all, it's easy to answer the question, when did I get married? I got married 40 years ago in June.
Really? Just right out of the seminary?
No, it took me a little while. I was to start out with as a young person. I wrote a book called Broken Parts, Missing Pieces, and I tell the story of how shy I was as a person. You'd never think this guy would have difficulty meeting people because God called him into ministry, but that was one of the things God worked through in my life. But I met her at a Bible bookstore when I was about to go out and do ministry on the Olympic Peninsula. She was in Tacoma at the time. And she had seen an article about me in the Tacoma News Tribune that had on the religious section about this Native American returning home to his own people. So it was a nice article, and she had seen it, and she said, "Are you the guy in the article?" And my first introduction to fame, right? And so that got us into where we talked a little bit, a cup of coffee, and eventually a lunch together, and pretty soon we were dating and asking serious questions about our future. And so we were married 40 years ago, and have 3 kids. And one of them is in Central America learning Spanish right now, and he's into the computer technology field. My daughter works for a real estate firm in the Minneapolis area. And my son Chris is going to school right now, but right now he's kind of trying to figure out what to do. He's an excellent writer, and I'm trying to steer him toward journalism or writing, or even this. He's very talented.
Thanks. Good for you. While you're talking about writing, tell us a little bit about your book, when you did it, what drew you to the topic, and how it's been received.
It's a self-published book, Broken Parts, Missing Pieces. It consists of a circle that's not quite complete, and my name is etched in there, but there are missing letters. It's to symbolize the story I'm telling is about my own brokenness coming out of the family system. I talk in detail about my family history, and it's not a pretty story at times, and you'll wonder, how did he live through that or get through all of that? But it's also, and more importantly, it's the story of how God takes the broken pieces of our lives, and when he takes us into his care and keeping as he did me, he says, now I'm going to start putting these together. But it's a slow revelation about myself. In other words, Don, I can't tell you everything about you because you can't handle it yet. But I'm going to slowly reveal. For example, I talk about being abused as a child. I had buried that so deep. I didn't even know about it until I started writing the book. And I was sitting at a coffee table somewhere, and all of a sudden, when I came to this story I was telling, I came across that incident. You bury those things so deep, as people often do, to, because it's hurtful. And all of a sudden, I teared up, and I couldn't understand why. Then it came clear to me what it was. So it's really God saying, Don, I need to clear these things up for you. These things are buried so deep in your life, and if you don't deal with them, you can't help other people. And that was part of how he was preparing me for what I do today. So this book is really recounting story after story, not only of ministry stories, but of my personal journey from brokenness to gradual healing. And I think that's a lifetime experience, by the way. It doesn't all happen. It's still happening.
And it's available?
It's available through our office in Milwaukee. We have, it's the cheapest way to get it. We have them on file. I sell them for like $10 each, plus shipping, and that's at, our office address is 3525 North 124th. Brookfield, Wisconsin, and it's 53005. That's where you can order them. Or you can get them on Amazon or as an ebook, and Amazon has it, Broken Parts, Missing Pieces by Don Johnson, and you can get it off Amazon.
What is the name of the organization you serve now?
Lutheran Indian Ministries.
And you're the Chief Executive Officer?
I'm the Chief Executive Officer of that ministry.
How often do you have to go to Milwaukee to be there?
As often as necessary, but at least once a month to sit down with my administrative staff, and we do planning and discussion. We have a website to maintain. We do mail out mailings. We produce devotions twice a year, Advent and Lent. They go out to over 4,000. They go out to about 4,000 congregations, and they're widely regarded because they're written by my staff in their field experience, either with a Lent theme or an Advent theme. And so we probably about 400,000 of them are mailed out, and that's one of our most important aspects of ministry back to the people who support us.
Now, when you're not in Milwaukee, what else do you do?
Well, I mean, this is central area for me because I can fly almost anywhere. Tomorrow I leave for Alaska for meeting with some of my staff up in central Alaska, and then Fairbanks and Anchorage. And we also mentioned we have a boat that we have up in Alaska that we haven't had. We've had a skipper for it. He's a retired state trooper for Alaska, and we want to see if there's a possibility of using that for training life skills for kids at risk in Native communities. And it's a big boat. It's like a 67-foot, 100-ton type boat, and it sleeps like 14, 15 people. But it can go from small community to small community. You can take people on retreats, or you can do VBS out of it. But we haven't had the ability right now to fund it, to keep it going. So it's right now, it's not in dry dock, but it's being operated on a very slim basis with this state trooper guy. And so that's one of the things that we also can do is we also try to teach programs to help people prevent them from getting into trouble in the first place.
You mentioned funding. How are you funded? And well, how are you funded? I presume it's a fairly expensive ministry.
I mean, it is, because we're scattered sites across a good part of our country. And most of the communities we work in are poor. They don't have a lot of resources on their own to pay their staff or anything. So they raise some funds on their own, but for the most part, it's the generous donors that we have, the gifts that so many people that are part of our information base. We send out appeals to them on a regular basis. They can go to our website and give. By the way, our website is LutheranIndianMinistries.org. Very simple, LutheranIndianMinistries.org, all small case. But people oftentimes will donate us through that means, and occasionally we get foundation money. Sometimes significant donors are friends of ours, and part of my job is to go to those people and tell them how they're blessing us. I mean, the donors really make this all possible. This is how we do our business.
You've been in the business for 40 years. What are your expectations just for the next decade? I mean, it's probably taken 40 years to sort of get to a point where maybe change will be a little quicker. Maybe not, I don't know. But
at my state in life, one of my main goals is to be able to prepare the ministry for life without me. There has to be some way for this thing to continue, and that means keeping the vision alive and building the support base that can keep it alive, and then raising up a leader to take responsibility to keep the organization going. So over the next 2.5 to 3 years, that's my #1 focus. Beyond that, I'm always aware that ministry goes as far as God is taking it. And I want the organization and myself, for that matter, to be open to God's leading, to say, okay, God, do you want this bigger, smaller, or not at all? This is yours. We want to do this for your sake and for your glory. That's why we do it. So the stories we tell oftentimes are extremely amazing stories, because the people we work with are so far down and beat up so much by life that the only way they were changed is by miracle. They know it, and the people who hear their story know it. So my goal is to keep that sense of being in God's hands. And my goal will be, when I leave, I hope to be like the old Indian chiefs of the past. When they were no longer going to war, they became counselors and advisors to their leader, the young bucks. And that's what probably I would like to be doing. My board understands this and will probably keep me around so that I can say, good luck, guys. God bless you.
Are you having some success in getting Native Americans and Native Hawaiians to be interested in the ministry of one variety or another?
Oh yeah. I mean, that's the magic of the appeal of a ministry that says you're worth something. You have talents that God has given you, and you can be used of God, and will help you get there. Because a lot of times it's not ministry to anybody anymore. It's actually inviting them to be partner with you. And then oftentimes they discover they were so much better than they thought they were. And it's not a prideful sense as it is a healthy realization that I am somebody special to God, and He's called me into this, and I can do some unique things by His grace. And then when I do and use the God in that way, I know I have self-worth.
Do you connect at all with the Native American groups in the Twin Cities and all of their activities?
Good question. I am often so busy I don't do that. I recently attended the National Congress of American Indians gathering that they had over here in St. Paul. I did I used to attend that myself many years ago when I was a tribal leader in Washington, D.C. But it's a gathering of representatives from all the big tribes in America, and they have their own little leadership group. And I was kind of thrilled to go there. I actually met some of my cousins there and people that I had known in other places. So here they were in St. Paul, in downtown St. Paul. So that was kind of neat. So that's my connection with some of these groups has been, on occasion it's been there, but not on a consistent basis. I don't regularly attend their meetings.
Do you, are you open and encouraging of invitations to speak to various groups about Native American issues, but also especially your own ministries? Oh,
absolutely. I'm a storyteller. I grew up with a people group that for thousands of years kept their history alive, and by telling story. And if you've been raised in that world for thousands of years, your DNA changes. And that's how you tell a story. Even writing my book was a little challenging because most people think linearly. in American culture. They, you know, this is the end and this is the beginning, and you know, this is how it all fits together. Well, I'm still trying to figure it. I wrote this book like that. I knew where I was going when I finished it. My second book is going the same way. I kind of intuitively know that it's a good book and it's going to be a good book, but if you told me, well, how is it going to end? I would say, I don't know yet. I'll know when I get there. And that's part of the storytelling of Native America. I do tell story. I'm a good speaker publicly, and can share lots of interesting stories of our ministry, but also about how that relates to a broader picture of our world. We're living at a very complex time with racial issues on the rise, and tensions between people. I think Native Americans bring some insights to that. And that's, you know, part of my goal is to raise that up in my next book.
Well, it's amazing how quickly the time can pass as we're having a fun conversation. I'm wondering if there's anything you particularly would like the viewers to know that I haven't touched on yet, or you haven't touched on yet.
Boy, I don't know. You've done such a good job in just bringing out what I had to say. I appreciate your audience, and if any of them ever want to contact me or in any way, I'm sure they could find out through this station, because you know how to get a hold of me. But I'm a local area boy and love the place I'm living in, and look forward to seeing what God will do while I'm here.
Do you go around and preach on Sundays fairly regularly, or occasionally, or?
I do occasionally. I don't purposely put myself out there, because it's all these other things I'm doing during the week, and then I add that on. And you do have to keep your families together.
Yes, you do.
It's one of my goals with my organization, because all of my staff are pretty well called to do different things. And if you end up doing too much of that, you can find out that you're needing to counsel that family.
Does your spouse work outside the home?
No, she doesn't. Fortunately, she has a lot of her life she has, but fortunately she finally can sit back and enjoy her place. She's an artist and a photographer, and she loves that, and she's very good at it, and so she's enjoying that. And by the way, this area is great for that.
It is. Well, she was raised in the Northwest too.
Yeah, her roots are, her father was originally from Michigan. He was a POW during the Korean War, and I think he was a pilot in the Second World War, really military hero type guy. But her family ended up from Michigan. They ended up for a brief time, they lived in Sheboygan when she was just a little girl, Wisconsin, and then ended up in Oregon, and with big logging company, Weyerhaeuser, and then to Tacoma. That's where I met her.
Isn't that something?
Yeah, but their roots were originally St. Louis, Michigan.
Good. Well, it's been a delight meeting you. Maybe as things move along, we can get you back again to expand on the conversation a little bit more. In the meanwhile, we're grateful for everything you shared. We're delighted that you're adding this extra interest to our community, and I hope people will avail themselves of the opportunity to get to know you, know more about you and your ministry. And we wish you the very best, with gratitude for your willingness to be here today.
As we would say in my Makah tribe language, kleko, kleko. That's a thank you.
Well, now that you bring that up, if we have a couple more seconds, so if you go on the site, it has an English translation of a sentence in the Makah language, and the characters are a combination of letters and like question mark. I mean, I've never seen anything.
Oh, those are probably representing glottal. You know, for linguist type people, because the Makah language was very almost guttural.
Is it? So when you can read it, you know what that means.
No, I can't. I mean, I know a little bit, not enough to explain it or expound on it. But yeah, it's like I said, it's a language group that's very small. You know, it's just on Vancouver Island, our cousins.
How many members of the tribe remain?
Right now, I believe our membership is probably close to 2,100.
2,100, and at its greatest, what was the population?
It's hard to know those numbers because the tribe was originally settled in 5 small communities on what became Washington State, and they were all forced to live in one place eventually by the government. But there was smallpox and measles and stuff like that just wiped out large. There's actually grave sites in my community that were mass burials. So we wiped out a lot of people, and I don't know what the original populations were.
Okay. Again, thank you. And thank you for being with us, and we'll look forward to being with you again soon, we hope. Have a great rest of the day and a wonderful rest of the summer. Thanks for visiting.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay.